If you travel to the city of Munster, Germany today, you'll see 3 human-sized cages on the spire of the cathedral tower. They stand as permanent reminders of the Munster Rebellion, which was led by Anabaptists. When you think Anabaptist, you probably think of a bunch of peace-loving farmers who have chin-strapped beards and wear old-timey clothes. And for most of history, you'd probably be correct. But there was this one time that the Anabaptist went full dictatorship. The story of the Munster Rebellion begins in Zurich, where some Protestant leaders felt like Zwingli and Luther were not taking the Reformation far enough. One of their biggest distinctives was, besides adult baptism, was also their strong belief in equality, their strong belief in pacifism, and their strong belief in separation between church and state. Both Catholics and Protestants felt like this was a subversive and dangerous idea, so they began to both heavily and violently persecute them. In fact, in 1528, Holy Roman Emperor Charles V issued an edict that said that all Anabaptists would be killed on sight. Now, as time went on and the persecution and the deaths mounted, new Anabaptist leader, revolutionary Anabaptist leaders, decided it was time to take this movement in a different direction and attempt to establish a new Jerusalem on earth. The early 1530s were a period of religious strife in the city of Munster. Catholics and Protestants were vying for control and influence over the city. There was at the time a prince who was also the Catholic bishop of the city by the name of Franz von Walden. Now, this strife and argumentation led a self-proclaimed prophet and religious leader by the name of Johann Matthias to believe that this was the perfect place to plant the city of New Jerusalem. He had a right-hand man by the name of John of Leyden, who was a tailor before he had decided to become a religious leader. So in 1533, Matthias, John of Leyden, and a bunch of Anabaptists began to pour into the city with the goal of trying to take over the city. In January of 1534, the Anabaptists numbered enough in the city to where they were able to take it over from von Walden and kick him out. Matthias and his right-hand man, John of Leyden, quickly went about implementing the vision that they had for the city. So they banned all money, they made basically like a common food bank and a common clothing bank and just distributed it as they needed. They were basically communists centuries before Marx was born. And they generally went about implementing their vision of equality and baptism. They burned down Catholic iconography all across the city. But not everything was kumbaya and hunky-dory. Von Walden had returned with an army and was laying siege to the city, so food and supplies weren't getting in. Another intense issue was there was debate within the movement itself. But Matthias would not tolerate any dissent, so he kicked anyone who stood up against him out of the city walls to where they would be instantly slaughtered by von Walden. Finally, on Easter of 1534, Matthias got a vision that the Lord told him that he was a modern-day Gideon, and that if he went outside alone, he would be able to defeat von Walden's forces. So he announces this in his Easter morning service. He storms outside the city, eager to take action, and he is utterly slaughtered and defeated. And John Leyden becomes the new leader of the Anabaptists in the city. Upon becoming leader of the Anabaptists, John of Leyden, or the Tailor King as he would become known, went full David Koresh. He started having erratic visions all the time. One of the visions was that everyone in the city should be polygamist and that polygamy was mandatory because there were more men than women in the city. Another vision that he had was that he could execute anyone at any time for any reason because he was God's arbiter on earth. Another thing he did was declare himself king of the world since he set as leader of New Jerusalem. All the while, the food situation got more and more desperate, and von Walden's army would not let up. Finally, after all this erratic behavior and visions, some people in the city felt like it was time for a change. So they opened the gate and let von Walden back into the city on June 24th of 1535. Von Walden instantly took back over, and rather than just instantly killing Leyden and some of the other Anabaptist leaders, he instead opted to torture them for weeks on end to make an example of them. And actually, after their deaths, he took John of Leyden and two of the biggest Anabaptist supporters and put them in the cages and hung them from the spire of St. Lambert's Church. Following these horrific events, the Anabaptist movement would completely abandon any notion of state control and abandon any notion of violence. They believed their failure there was a result of going against pacifism, so they went back to the literal interpretation of the Sermon on the Mount. The Catholics would remain firmly in control of the city for years to come, and the Anabaptist movement would be set up for the persecution it would continue to face through the rest of the 1500s.